This is the last place Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were supposed to be seen alive. A routine child custody exchange at a lonely Oklahoma gas station. But they never arrived. Instead, searchers found Veronica's car here, doors closed, but chaos inside. Blood on the asphalt, a hammer with a broken handle, and nearby, her glasses, reflecting the harsh Oklahoma sun. 2 weeks later, investigators would make a discovery that would shock even seasoned law enforcement. What they found buried on this remote farm would expose a conspiracy so calculated, so twisted, that it defied belief. But to understand how two innocent women became targets of what prosecutors call a mission from God, we need to go back, way back, to a custody battle that would consume lives, destroy families, and ultimately cost everything. Veronica Butler believed in second chances. Born February 28, 1997, in the small farming community of Hugstown, Kansas, she grew up understanding that life rarely follows the script you write. Her parents divorced when she was young, but Veronica refused to let that define her. She excelled in school, became her class valedictorian, and delivered the commencement speech that still echoes in her hometown. Veronica always said she wanted to help people. She was studying to be a surgical technician, working as a nursing assistant. She had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered. But Veronica's greatest pride? Her two sons, 6-year-old and 8-year-old boys who were, by all accounts, her entire world. The trouble began with their father, Wrangler Rickman. Never married, but connected by their children, Veronica and Wrangler's relationship deteriorated rapidly after their 2018 breakup. Here's where our story takes its first dark turn. What started as a typical custody dispute would spiral into something unprecedented. But was it really about the children? Or was something else driving the hatred that would eventually consume everyone involved? Meet Tiffany Adams, Wrangler's mother, the boys' paternal grandmother. Adams is the paternal grandmother of Butler's children, and by 2024, she had assumed day-to-day care of the boys while her son struggled with addiction and legal troubles. But Tiffany Adams wasn't just any grandmother. Neighbors described her as aggressive, controlling, and increasingly unstable. She had begun associating with a group that would eventually call themselves something chilling, God's Misfits, an anti-government group. The question that haunted investigators: when did protecting her grandsons transform into something much more dangerous? Let's examine the timeline that led to tragedy. In 2020, Wrangler Rickman filed for full custody of his sons, alleging Veronica had taken them across state lines without permission. The court battle was brutal. Wrangler presented evidence of neglect. Photos of bruises, claims of animal bite marks, allegations that Veronica left the children with unsuitable caregivers. But here's what's crucial. Veronica fought back with her own allegations. 5 separate complaints about Wrangler's behavior: physical aggression, inappropriate conduct. The court investigated every claim. And here's the shocking part. They found Veronica's allegations to be unfounded. In one devastating moment, her own son admitted she had asked him to lie about his father. The judge's ruling was swift and severe. Veronica lost primary custody, reduced to supervised visits 1 day per week. For a woman whose entire identity revolved around being a mother, this was devastating. But was it the end of her story? Not even close. Rather than give up, Veronica reinvented herself. She returned to school, secured steady employment, and began attending church regularly. It was there she met Jillian Kelly, a pastor's wife who would become her closest friend and advocate. Jillian saw something in Veronica that others had missed. Not a neglectful mother, but a young woman who had made mistakes and was desperately trying to correct them. Jillian believed in redemption. She saw Veronica's potential and was determined to help her rebuild her relationship with her sons. By early 2024, Veronica had documentation of her transformation: steady job, educational progress, character references, clean record. She filed a petition to expand her visitation rights. The hearing was scheduled for April 17, 2024. Her attorney was optimistic, but someone else was watching these developments with growing alarm. While Veronica was rebuilding her life in Kansas, something deadly was taking shape 30 miles away in rural Oklahoma. The four suspects charged in the killings belonged to an anti-government group called the God's Misfits. But who were these people? And how did a grandmother's fear of losing her grandsons intersect with radical ideology? Meet the conspirators. Tiffany Adams, 54, the grandmother who had assumed care of Veronica's children, described by neighbors as increasingly paranoid and controlling. Tad Cullum, 43, Tiffany's partner, with a history of firearms violations and known anger management issues. Cora Twombly, 44, and her common-law husband Cole Twombly, 50, described as radical religious adherents who believed government interference in family matters was against God's will. And finally, Paul Grice, a man so extreme in his anti-government beliefs that he had filed documents stating his children were his creation and not subject to government control. But here's what investigators discovered that chills the blood. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. The planning had been going on for months. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a 16-year-old girl living in the Twombly household. What she told investigators painted a picture of premeditated murder that was almost impossible to believe. They called themselves God's Misfits. They would meet in my mom's bedroom and talk about Veronica Butler. My mom said, "We won't have to worry about Veronica anymore. It's all planned. It'll be over by the weekend," said the girl. The teenager described weeks of secretive meetings, burner phones, stun devices, and ominous references to the road she always takes and places where things can be hidden properly. But the most chilling detail? The group had tried to kill Butler in February 2024, near Hugoton, Kansas, but she wouldn't leave her home. This wasn't their first attempt. It was their second. What would drive ordinary people, a grandmother, a couple, a group of self-proclaimed religious believers, to plan multiple attempts at murder? As March 2024 progressed, two timelines were converging toward a collision that would destroy lives. The first timeline, Veronica Butler was preparing for the biggest legal battle of her life. Her April 17th court hearing represented her best chance to regain meaningful access to her sons. She had character witnesses, documentation of her transformation, and evidence of Tiffany Adams' repeated violations of court orders. The second timeline, the God's Misfits were finalizing their plans for what they believed. On March 29th, just one day before Veronica and Jillian disappeared, Tad Cullum rented a remote property, claiming he needed to cut down a tree and bury construction debris. The bodies were found in a chest freezer on a property leased by Tad Cullum, 8.5 miles away from where Butler's car was found abandoned. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was to execute their plan. But there was one element the conspirators hadn't counted on. Jillian Kelly's presence would transform their calculated murder into something even more twisted. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly departed Hugoton, Kansas, for what should have been a routine 45-minute drive to pick up Veronica's sons for their weekly visit. But the God's Misfits had made one crucial manipulation that would seal both women's fate. The court-appointed supervisor, Cheryl, received a phone call from Tiffany Adams just before the scheduled visit. Tiffany convinced Cheryl her services wouldn't be needed, claiming there was a temporary simplification of the schedule. This left Jillian Kelly as the only adult supervisor for the visit, exactly what the conspirators had planned. Cell tower data shows both women's phones remained active until 9:42 a.m., just as they were approaching the meeting location. Then, simultaneously, both phones went dead. What happened in those final minutes? The evidence suggests a coordinated ambush. The conspirators blocked the road, forcing Veronica to divert onto a less traveled path. When she recognized what appeared to be a familiar vehicle, she likely assumed it was related to the custody exchange. Instead, she and Jillian had driven into a trap that had been months in the planning. The attack was swift and brutal. Evidence of a struggle, blood inside the car and on the asphalt, a broken hammer, Jillian's empty gun holster, her weapon taken. But here's what haunts investigators. Originally, only Veronica was the target. Details from probable cause affidavits suggest that the two women might have suffered a violent death. So why was Jillian Kelly murdered alongside her friend? According to the 16-year-old witness, her mother Cora Twombly had made it clear, Jillian isn't just some bystander. She's aligned with the enemy. In the twisted logic of the God's misfits, anyone supporting Veronica's attempt to regain custody deserved the same fate. After the murders, the conspirators transported both bodies to the remote property Tad Cullum had rented just 24 hours earlier. They buried the women in a chest freezer covered with dirt and debris, but their cover-up was already unraveling. The 16-year-old witness described the adults returning home around noon, appearing tense and disheveled. Cora Twombly immediately ordered her daughter to clean their white pickup truck without explanation. When the teenager asked questions, she was told, "Things didn't go as planned, but there's nothing to worry about now." The physical evidence was overwhelming. Tad Cullum had fresh scratches on his face and neck, injuries consistent with defensive wounds from a victim fighting for her life. He attempted to hide them with a hastily grown beard, but forensic analysis proved the facial hair was only days old. DNA evidence linked multiple suspects to the burial site. Footprints in Veronica's car matched none of the victims, but corresponded to several suspects. The burner phones provided a digital trail of the conspiracy. Cell towers placed the devices at the ambush site during the murders, then at the burial location later that same day. For a group that prided itself on operating outside government oversight, they had left a remarkably clear trail of evidence. The search for Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly mobilized hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement officers across 2 states. For nearly 2 weeks, hope remained that the women might be found alive. But experienced investigators knew better. The evidence pointed to abduction and probable murder from day one. April 14th, 2024. After nearly 2 weeks of searching, investigators following digital evidence and witness testimony arrived at a remote farm in Texas County, Oklahoma. What they found ended all hope but provided the answers their families desperately needed. This case did not end the way we had hoped. It's certainly been a tragedy for everyone involved, said OSBI Director Angela Spurlock in an interview. The discovery of the bodies triggered a massive law enforcement response. Within 48 hours, arrest warrants were issued for all 5 members of the God's Misfits conspiracy. But even as handcuffs clicked shut, questions remained. How could a custody dispute escalate to premeditated murder? What role did radical ideology play? And could this tragedy have been prevented? April 12, 2024. In a coordinated operation across Oklahoma, law enforcement arrested 5 individuals connected to what prosecutors would later call one of the most calculated murders in state history. Searches of their homes revealed the depth of their preparation. Semi-automatic weapons, ammunition, bulletproof vests, and go bags containing cash, zip ties, gloves, and changes of clothing. This wasn't just murder. It was a military-style operation planned by people who genuinely believed they were carrying out divine justice. When the suspects appeared in court, the raw emotion was overwhelming. The enraged relatives reportedly had to be held back as 4 people arrested in the mom's death showed up for an arraignment. For the families of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, seeing their loved ones' killers in person was almost unbearable. To understand how 5 people convinced themselves that murder was justified, we need to examine the ideology that bound them together. God's Misfits has come under fire since an affidavit revealed that a quartet of accused murderers were group members. Anti-government religious extremism often combines a distrust of legal institutions with a belief that adherents are directly answerable to God rather than human authority. When these beliefs intersect with personal grievances, the results can be deadly. An expert said, Paul Grice exemplified this mindset. He had declared extremist beliefs and even attempted to renounce his American citizenship, claiming his children were not subject to government control. For the God's Misfits, Veronica Butler's attempt to use the court system to regain custody wasn't just a legal matter. It was an attack on their fundamental beliefs about family, authority, and divine will. But here's the question that haunts this case. Were these people genuinely motivated by religious conviction? Or did they use ideology to justify a grandmother's desperate attempt to keep her grandsons? As this documentary was being produced, the legal proceedings against the God's Misfits were still ongoing. All 5 defendants have pleaded not guilty to the charges against them. Prosecutors have stated their intention to seek the maximum penalty, either life imprisonment without parole or capital punishment. The evidence against them appears overwhelming. digital records placing them at the crime scene, DNA evidence linking them to the burial site, the detailed testimony of the 16-year-old witness, physical evidence of planning and preparation, confessions from at least one co-conspirator, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Tiffany Adams, 54. Tad Cullum, 43. Cora Twombly, 44. Cole Twombly, 50. Paul Grice, age initially withheld. March 30th, 2024. A date that would forever scar the Oklahoma-Kansas borderlands. 2 women, a struggling mother and a pastor's wife, drove into the vast prairie emptiness for what should have been the most ordinary of errands, picking up children for a birthday party. They never came home. What happened next would expose a web of religious extremism, anti-government paranoia, and cold-blooded murder that reads like something from the darkest corners of American Gothic fiction. But this isn't fiction. This is the terrifying true story of how a group calling themselves God's misfits turned faith into a weapon and love into a death warrant. Veronica Butler was fighting the battle of her life, not against cancer or poverty, but against her own past. At 27, this young mother had clawed her way back from addiction and chaos, transforming herself from a cautionary tale into someone worthy of raising her 2 young sons. Her dreams were modest but powerful. Finish her surgical technician training, rebuild her relationship with her children, prove to the world and herself that people could change. Jillian Kelly was everything Veronica wasn't supposed to have. A friend who believed in second chances. A pastor's wife with 4 children of her own. Jillian saw potential where others saw only failure. Her fatal flaw: she believed that standing by a friend was worth any risk. Tiffany Adams was the children's paternal grandmother and the architect of annihilation. Court documents paint her as a woman consumed by hatred for Veronica, determined to prevent her from ever seeing the boys again. She didn't just want custody, she wanted Veronica erased. The God's Misfits were Adams' chosen instruments of vengeance. Court documents show the details of the investigation that led to the arrest of 4 suspects in the murders of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, revealing this wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion, but a meticulously planned execution. The brilliance of the prosecution's case lies in its brutal simplicity. Prosecutors say 5 people charged with murdering 2 women because of a custody dispute meticulously planned the crime before carrying it out. This wasn't the work of lone wolves or impulsive killers. This was domestic terrorism wrapped in religious righteousness. The plan: intercept the women during the custody exchange on a desolate highway where screams would echo unheard across empty fields. The motive: not money, not passion, but ideology. The God's Misfits had convinced themselves that the family court system was a corrupt arm of a godless government. In their twisted theology, murdering 2 innocent women wasn't just justified, it was holy work. The execution: 2 of the defendants accused of murdering 2 Kansas women in 2024 shared testimony of the murders in the preliminary trial, providing chilling details that prosecutors will use to build their case for justice. But the defense teams have signaled they will challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case, setting up what promises to be one of the most disturbing trials in recent memory. A legal analyst observed that this case raises complex questions about group dynamics, religious extremism, and the line between ideology and criminal intent. The jury will have to determine not just what happened, but why it happened and who bears ultimate responsibility. The court set a trial date for the week of May 18th, 2026 for Tiffany Adams and Cole Twombly, ensuring this nightmare will haunt the community for years to come. Meanwhile, Cora Twombly and Paul Grice are also charged in the case and will testify against the other defendants, a development that could provide the most damning testimony yet. The legal maneuvering has already begun. The 32-page filing highlights new allegations, specifically against the paternal grandmother of Veronica Butler's children in a wrongful death lawsuit that promises to expose even more disturbing details about this conspiracy: the women they destroyed. In all the focus on conspiracy theories, trials, and ideology, we must never forget who Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly actually were, and why their murders represent something far more sinister than a simple custody dispute gone wrong. Veronica wasn't just rebuilding her life, she was rewriting the entire narrative of who she could become. Despite her past mistakes, she had demonstrated real growth and transformation. Her dream of becoming a surgical technician was just months away from reality. She had fought through addiction, overcome poverty, and was finally becoming the mother her boys deserved. Jillian Kelly was a pastor's wife who embodied everything the God's misfits claimed to represent: faith, family, and moral conviction. Yet her decision to support her friend's custody efforts likely cost her life. As a family member tearfully explained, Veronica wasn't perfect, but she was trying so hard to become the mother her boys deserved. Jillian saw that. She believed in people when they couldn't believe in themselves. The ideology of murder. Both women died for the same reason. They believed in the power of legal institutions to provide justice and the possibility of redemption through personal change. The God's misfits killed them not just for who they were, but for what they represented: hope, transformation, and faith in a system the killers had rejected. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was ideological murder, the cold-blooded elimination of women who dared to believe that courts could deliver justice and people could change. In the twisted worldview of the God's misfits, Veronica's transformation from addict to aspiring healthcare worker wasn't inspiring. It was threatening. It challenged their fundamental belief that the system was irredeemably corrupt. The ripple effects of this conspiracy have shattered more than 2 families. The judge overseeing the original custody case has received death threats allegedly connected to God's misfit supporters. Court security has been increased for all officials involved in the proceedings. The message is clear: challenge our ideology and you become a target. The case has raised uncomfortable questions about the intersection of religious extremism, family law, and violence in rural America. A community leader, still struggling to comprehend how neighbors became killers, said, "We always knew there were people out here who didn't trust the government, but we never imagined it would lead to something like this. These were our neighbors, our community members. How do you reconcile that?" As the legal proceedings continue, fundamental questions remain unanswered, questions that should terrify every American. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that law enforcement missed? How does a group of seemingly ordinary rural Americans transform into cold-blooded killers willing to murder innocent women over a custody dispute? How many other God's misfits exist in communities across America? How many other anti-government groups are one family court decision away from violence? How many other Veronicas and Jillians are living under death sentences they don't even know exist? What happens to the 2 young boys at the center of this custody dispute? They've lost their mother to murder and their grandmother to prison. The family court system that was supposed to protect their interests became the catalyst for unimaginable tragedy. These children are the living victims of their grandmother's hatred, orphaned not by accident or illness, but by ideology. Justice delayed or denied. The trials of the God's misfits will likely continue for months or even years. Justice for Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly remains in the hands of 12 jurors who must weigh evidence, testimony, and the competing narratives of prosecution and defense. But one thing is already clear. This case has forever changed how we think about the intersection of family law, religious extremism, and domestic terrorism in America. It has exposed the dark underbelly of rural radicalization, where anti-government sentiment can metastasize into murderous conspiracy. 2 women went to pick up children for a birthday party on a beautiful spring morning. They were armed with nothing more dangerous than birthday presents and custody papers. They believed in the law, in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. They never came home. The God's misfits made sure of that, not in a moment of passion or panic, but through careful planning, cold calculation, and the kind of ideological certainty that transforms neighbors into killers. As America grapples with rising extremism and political violence, the murders of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly serve as a chilling reminder. Sometimes the greatest threats come not from foreign terrorists or urban gangs, but from the people next door who have convinced themselves that murder is a form of prayer. The God's misfits didn't just kill 2 women. They killed the very idea that justice, redemption, and transformation are possible in America. And that, perhaps, was their real goal all along. If you're as fascinated by these dark mysteries as I am, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. I dive deep into cases like this, cases that most people never hear about, with details the mainstream media won't cover. Second, share this video with someone who loves uncovering crimes as much as you do. These stories need to reach more people. The victims deserve to have their stories told, and sometimes it's that one extra person who sees the case that has the missing piece of the puzzle. And here's the thing, YouTube's algorithm decides who sees these investigations first, and if you're not subscribed and sharing, you might miss the case I'm covering next. These mysteries don't solve